temperature in the Bitterroot Valley had dropped to 24 degrees below zero. The wind chill made it feel like 40 below. The kind of cold that turned spit to ice before it hit the ground. The kind of cold that killed. Montana State Patrol had closed Highway 93 6 hours ago. Search and rescue had pulled their teams back at noon. The helicopter pilots had grounded their birds. Even the wolves, creatures born to survive the harshest winters the Rockies could throw at them, had retreated to their dens. No biological organism could survive 52 hours in this without shelter. That's what the experts said. That's what the statistics promised. That's what Alpha King Ashford Emberwolf was trying not to believe as he sat in the Great Hall of Iron Peak Lodge, staring at two pieces of paper that would end his world. Death certificates for his sons. Blank except for the names he would have to write in his own hand. Gray Emberwolf, age 5 years, 7 months, 14 days. Storm Emberwolf, age 5 years, 7 months, 14 days. The clock on the wall read 4:47 in the morning. It was a grandfather clock mahogany brought over from Scotland in 1847 when the Pack's founders first settled this valley. Its pendulum swung with mechanical precision. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Each second another moment his sons were out there in the frozen dark. Each second another chance their small hearts had stopped beating. The Great Hall had been designed for feasts and celebrations for the boisterous politics of wolf society. Vaulted ceilings of Douglas fir. Stone fireplace you could walk into, standing upright. Long tables carved from single trees scarred by generations of claws and teeth and passion. Tonight it felt like a tomb. Ashford sat at the head table. He wasn't moving, wasn't blinking, just staring at a knot in the wood grain like it held answers to questions he couldn't bear to ask. 380 members of the Iron Peak Pack filled the hall, warriors who had fought in the Rogue Wars, mothers who had buried children of their own, elders who remembered when grizzlies still ruled these mountains. All of them dressed in charcoal gray, the traditional color of mourning. The scent was overwhelming, wet wool from snow melting off coats, wood smoke from the massive fire that couldn't seem to heat the room, and underneath it all, the sharp metallic tang of collective grief so thick it coated the back of the throat like blood. At the front of the hall, two small pedestals stood empty, waiting for urns that would hold nothing. You couldn't burn bodies you didn't have. You couldn't lay to rest children who were still out there, frozen in the dark alone. Ashford's hand tightened around the fountain pen. His knuckles went white. The expensive metal groaned under the pressure, then snapped. Ink bled across the death certificate, for Gray turning his son's name into an illegible black stain. He didn't feel it. The physical pain was a distant thing, meaningless compared to the canyon that had opened in his chest where his heart used to be. Alpha, the voice came soft, hesitant. Ashford didn't respond. Alpha, we need to begin. Declan Frost stood 3 feet away, Beta of Iron Peak, Ashford's second in command. Best friends since they were pups, wrestling in the creek behind the old pack house. Declan's eyes were red-rimmed, his face haggard. He'd been out there with the search teams. 36 hours straight in the blizzard following scent trails that died in the wind, checking caves and hollows and abandoned mine shafts until his paws bled on the ice. He'd come back empty-handed. They all had. The elders are demanding it, Declan continued, his voice rough. The council says the pack bond is destabilizing. Without closure, without the ceremony, the wolves are getting aggressive. 3 fights broke out in the barracks last night, young ones challenging authority. The grief is making them feral. Ashford finally looked up. His eyes, normally a warm amber, had gone flat and cold. The eyes of a man who had already died inside, who was just waiting for his body to catch up. They want me to bury my sons before I've held their bodies. I want you to lead your people, Declan said, and there was just enough steel in his voice to be heard. Vivian is already stirring up the council. She's saying your grief has made you weak. She's suggesting that perhaps the bloodline wasn't meant to continue. A low rumble built in Ashford's chest. Not quite a growl, but close. The kind of sound that made windows rattle and small prey animals flee. Several wolves in the front rows flinched. Vivian Ashcroft, daughter of the former Alpha of the Northern Territory, a woman who had made no secret of her ambition to become his mate, his Luna, the mother of his heirs. A woman who had never forgiven him for choosing Serafina instead. Common bloodline, Vivian had sneered. No political connections, no strategic value. Serafina, beautiful, kind, gentle Serafina, who had died giving birth to the twins 5 years ago, who had made Ashford promise with her last breath that he would protect their sons, that he would love them enough for both parents. He had failed, spectacularly, completely. The one job that mattered more than being Alpha, more than leading the pack, more than anything else in this world, and he had failed. Let Vivian talk, Ashford said, and his voice came out like gravel grinding under a boot. If she speaks to me today, I will rip her throat out. I will paint these walls with her blood, and I will not regret it. That is exactly why we need the ceremony, Declan pressed. To show them you are still the Alpha King. To prove you can lead even through this. We assume the worst. We mourn. And then we hunt for whoever took them. Took them. Because the twins hadn't wandered off. 5-year-olds didn't open third-story windows in the middle of the night and climb down into a blizzard on their own. Someone had taken them from the nursery wing. Someone had drugged them to keep them quiet. Someone had hidden them in the storm to die. Murder. Premeditated. Cold-blooded. An attack not just on Ashford's family, but on the future of the Iron Peak Pack itself. The rage that burned through him at that thought was the only thing that felt real anymore. Everything else was numbness and snow and the endless tick of that damn clock. Ashford closed his eyes. He saw Gray's crooked smile the way the left side went up higher than the right. He saw Storm's obsession with drawing wolves, how he'd covered every surface in the nursery with crayon sketches. He felt the phantom weight of them climbing onto his lap during story time, small bodies warm and solid and alive. Gone. Both of them. Frozen in some cave or ravine while he sat here in the warmth useless. Fine, Ashford said, and the word tasted like ashes. Set up the hall. We mourn at dawn. The hours crawled by with excruciating slowness. The sun didn't rise so much as the sky turned from black to a bruised, sickly gray. The blizzard hadn't let up. Snow fell in thick curtains outside the windows, piling in drifts against the lodge walls. 6 feet deep on the north side, 8 on the south. The roads were impassable, the forest a white maze of death. The pack filed into the great hall in silence. They took their seats on the long benches, families clustering together for comfort. The children were kept home. This ceremony wasn't for young eyes. Vivian sat in the third row, her posture perfect, her expression carefully neutral. She wore black, expensive, and tailored, but she'd learned after Ashford's last warning not to make it look like a performance. The ceremony began. Elder Miriam Stoneheart, 73 years old and tough as the granite she was named for, led the traditional opening prayer. Words in the old language the tongue wolves spoke before they learned to be human. A plea to the moon goddess to guide the lost souls home, to welcome them to the eternal hunting grounds, where prey was always plentiful and the moon always full. It should have been comforting. It felt like a lie. Ashford took his place at the podium. 380 pairs of eyes watched him, waiting to see if their alpha would break, waiting to see if the strongest wolf in the northern Rockies could stand upright under the weight of a grief that would have crushed lesser men. He could, barely, but he could. Gray Ember Wolf, Ashford began, and his voice didn't shake. Couldn't shake. Alphas didn't shake. Born March 14th at 3:47 in the morning, 6 pounds, 4 ounces, came out screaming, ready to fight the world. He loved toy trucks, had 17 of them, lined them up every night before bed in order of size. He was going to be an engineer when he grew up. Build bridges, he said, connect things. A sob broke out somewhere in the middle rows. Ashford didn't look to see who it was, couldn't afford to. If he looked at the grief on their faces, he would shatter. Storm Emberwolf, born March 14th at 3:51 in the morning, 5 pounds, 11 ounces. Quiet. Watched everything. He drew wolves, hundreds of them. Covered the walls of the nursery in crayon drawings of our pack, our family, our home. He was going to be an artist. Capture beauty, he said. Make people see. Ashford's throat tried to close. He forced the words out anyway. They were supposed to bury me. They were supposed to stand here decades from now and tell stories about their stubborn, old father who never knew when to quit. They were supposed to boom. The sound came from the back of the hall. Not thunder, not an explosion, just the solid, heavy impact of something hitting the main doors. The massive oak doors, 8 feet tall and 4 inches thick, reinforced with iron bands. The doors that were barred from the inside against the storm. The room went deathly silent. Every wolf turned. 380 predators, suddenly alert hackles, rising instinct, screaming danger. Boom! Again. Harder this time. The bar across the door shuddered. Declan signaled the guards. 3 warriors moved toward the entrance, spears lowered. Old-fashioned weapons, yes, but effective. And legal in ways claws and teeth sometimes weren't when humans got involved. Boom! Open it, Ashford commanded. His voice cut through the tension like a blade. The warriors lifted the heavy iron bar. It took all 3 of them. They pulled and the doors swung inward, and the blizzard didn't just enter the hall. It exploded. Wind screamed through the opening like a living thing. Snow swirled across the polished floorboards in a vortex of white. The candles in the back 3 rows guttered out instantly. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in as many seconds. And framed in the doorway, backlit by the white hell of the storm, stood a figure. Small, impossibly small, barely 5.5 feet tall, thin to the point of emaciation. Wearing a coat that was 3 sizes too big, held together with duct tape. Jeans soaked through dark with freezing water. Boots that were cheap rubber things, the kind you bought at a gas station for $15, offering zero protection against a Montana winter. Human. Ashford knew it instantly. There was no scent of wolf, no underlying musk of shifter. She smelled like frost and pine needles and something antiseptic, medical clean. She took one step forward. Her knees buckled. She caught herself on the doorframe, knuckles white and cracked, bleeding sluggishly from split skin. Her lips were blue, her face a terrifying shade of translucent gray. Her eyelashes were frozen together with ice crystals. She looked like a ghost, like death itself had walked out of the storm to deliver a message. She was holding something. A bundle. Large, heavy, wrapped in a wool blanket that was covered in snow, clutched so tightly to her chest that her fingers looked like claws frozen in place. "Help," she whispered. The word was barely audible, brittle as dead leaves. "Please, help." The pack murmured, confusion, shock. A human here in the middle of a private ceremony during a blizzard that had killed search and rescue professionals. "Get her out!" Vivian's voice rang out sharp and offended. "This is sacred. How dare a human trespass on our grief?" "Silence," Ashford said. He didn't shout, didn't need to. The word carried the full weight of his authority, his alpha dominance, and Vivian's mouth snapped shut like she'd been slapped. Ashford stepped off the dais. The crowd parted for him automatically, an ocean of bodies moving without conscious thought, instinct, recognizing the apex predator in their midst. He walked down the center aisle, each step deliberate, each step bringing him closer to the impossible vision in the doorway. As he got closer, he could see the details that distance had hidden. Her hair was white blonde, plastered to her skull with ice. Her eyes were gray, the color of storm clouds, wide with terror and exhaustion and something else. Determination. Fierce, stubborn, unbreakable determination. But it was what she held that stopped his heart. The blanket. It was moving, just slightly. The barest rise and fall, the rhythm of breathing. Ashford stopped 5 feet away. The cold rolling off her was intense, a pocket of winter in the middle of the hall. He could see his breath misting in the air between them. "Who are you?" Ashford demanded, though his voice was softer now, gentler. This woman was dying. Hypothermia, advanced stages. She probably had minutes left before her core temperature dropped too low to recover. The woman looked up at him, met his eyes. Most humans couldn't hold a werewolf's gaze, especially in alphas. The predator in them screamed danger, triggered every prey instinct in the human hindbrain. She didn't look away. "I found them," she whispered. Ashford's breath hitched. The world narrowed to a pinpoint, to those 3 words and the implication behind them. "What?" His voice came out strangled. "I found them," she said again, louder this time, swaying on her feet. "Route 9, old Marlowe's hunting cabin. The one that's been abandoned for 20 years. They were in the root cellar. I heard them crying." Her fingers were shaking so badly she could barely hold the blanket. She peeled back the top layer with movements that were painfully slow, each one costing her more energy than she had to spare. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. 380 wolves inhaled at once, scenting confirming what their eyes were showing them. Tucked inside the blanket, huddled together for warmth, were 2 small boys, Gray and Storm Emberwolf. Their lips were blue, their skin pale as the snow outside. Their eyes were closed, their small bodies completely still, except for the shallow rise and fall of their chests. But they were breathing. They were alive. Ashford fell to his knees. The Alpha King of Iron Peak, the man who had killed a Virogite Alpha with his bare hands at 26, who had led his pack through 2 wars and 100 battles, who feared nothing and no one, crashed to the floorboards in front of this shivering human woman. He reached out with hands that were shaking, trembling like he'd never trembled in his life, and touched Gray's cheek. Cold. So cold it burned. But underneath that cold was warmth. Faint, barely there, but real. The warmth of life. "Healers!" Ashford screamed. The sound tore from his throat, raw and primal, more animal than human. "Get the healers now!" Chaos erupted. Dr. Tavish Rivers and his medical team rushed forward with stretchers and emergency warming blankets. They swarmed the woman, trying to take the bundle from her arms. She pulled back. Panic flared in those gray eyes. "No," she rasped, her voice wild. "Don't hurt them. Please don't hurt them." "Give them to me," Ashford said, forcing himself to be calm, to be steady. He looked her in the eye, let her see the truth written in his face. "I'm their father." The woman blinked. Her gaze focused on Ashford's features, searching for something, some resemblance, some proof. She must have found it because slowly, agonizingly slowly, her strength gave out. She slumped forward. Ashford caught her, taking the weight of his sons and this stranger all at once into his arms. He felt how light she was. She couldn't weigh more than 105 pounds. She was a skeleton, wrapped in wet clothes, barely substantial enough to keep standing. "They're safe," Ashford whispered into her hair, though he didn't know why he was comforting her, why he was trying to reassure someone he didn't even know. "You got them safe." The medical team carefully extracted the boys from her frozen grip. They worked with practiced efficiency, checking vitals, calling out numbers that didn't mean anything to Ashford. All he cared about was the answer to one question. "Will they live?" he demanded. Dr. Tavish looked up. He was 58, had been the pack physician for 30 years, had delivered Ashford when he was born. His face was grim, but not hopeless. Core temperature, 89 degrees. Slow heart rate, shallow breathing. "But yes, Alpha, they'll live." She got them here in time. Relief hit Ashford so hard his knees almost buckled again. They would live. His sons would live. The medical team rushed toward the infirmary wing with the stretchers. Ashford wanted to follow, needed to be with them every second, but he still had the woman in his arms, and she was collapsing completely. Now her body finally giving up after whatever superhuman effort had kept her moving through 3 miles of blizzard. Vivian appeared at Ashford's side. Her expression was carefully controlled, but he could read the calculation in her eyes. "Alpha, hand the human to the guards. She smells like Marlowe's cabin. She probably kidnapped them herself and brought them back for a reward. It's a classic grift." Ashford looked down at the woman, at the frostbite on her fingertips so severe the skin had turned black, at the way she had wrapped her own scarf around one of the boys' necks, leaving her throat bare to the killing wind, at the sheer exhaustion radiating off her in waves. He could smell lies. It was one of his gifts as an alpha reading truth in the pheromones people gave off. This woman smelled like pine needles and antiseptic and something else, something sweet and mournful like rain on dry earth. She smelled like sacrifice, like someone who had given everything and expected nothing in return. Ashford looked up at Vivian. His eyes glowed a dangerous, iridescent gold, the beast rising to the surface, the predator that lived beneath his skin finally finding a target for the rage that had been building for 3 days. "She walked through a blizzard that grounded our helicopters," Ashford said, and each word was carved from ice. "She carried my sons 3 miles in conditions that killed 2 of our best trackers last winter. She is not a prisoner. She is a guest. And if you suggest otherwise again, Vivian, I will remove you from this hall by your throat." Vivian gasped, stumbling back. Around them, the pack watched in stunned silence. Ashford had never threatened a council member in public, never showed this kind of raw emotion, this lack of control. He didn't care. "Declan," Ashford said, his voice leaving no room for argument, "secure the perimeter. No one leaves until we know what happened. Vivian, get out of my sight before I forget you're protected by council law." He turned and carried the stranger toward the medical wing, following the path his sons had just taken. The funeral was canceled. The mourning was over. But the mystery of this woman, this impossible savior who had walked out of death itself, had only just begun. And Ashford Emberwolf, Alpha King of Iron Peak, would spend the rest of his life trying to understand how a human he'd never met had done what an entire pack of wolves could not. She had brought his sons home alive. Pain was the first thing Elspeth Crane felt when consciousness returned. Not the sharp, biting cold of the blizzard anymore. That had faded to a memory distant and almost dreamlike. This was different. The deep burning ache of blood returning to frozen limbs. The feeling of nerves waking up after being shocked into silence by temperatures that should have killed her. She opened her eyes. The ceiling wasn't the water-stained particle board of her trailer. It was high cream-colored with recessed lighting, currently dimmed to a soft glow that didn't hurt to look at. She was lying on a bed that felt like a cloud wrapped in sheets so soft they had to be Egyptian cotton, the kind she'd only ever seen in magazines. For a moment, she thought she was dead, that she'd frozen in the snow and this was whatever came after. Heaven maybe, though, she'd never been religious enough to have strong opinions about the afterlife. Then the pain registered again, and she knew she was alive. Heaven probably didn't come with the sensation of your toes burning like someone had set them on fire. "Easy now?" A deep clinical voice spoke from somewhere to her right. "Your core temperature is just stabilizing. If you move too fast, you'll go into shock." Elspeth turned her head slowly. A man in a white coat stood beside the bed checking a monitor that displayed numbers she didn't understand. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with graying temples and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He had the calm competence of someone who'd spent decades handling medical emergencies. "The boys," Elspeth rasped. Her throat felt like she'd swallowed broken glass. Are they stable? The doctor said, offering her a cup of water with a straw. Critical but stable thanks to you. Drink slowly. Small sips. Elspeth drank greedily, the water soothing the fire in her throat. Memories flooded back in fragments. The truck breaking down on the old logging road. The decision to cut through the woods instead of waiting to freeze. The sound of crying carried on the wind so faint, she'd almost convinced herself she'd imagined it. The abandoned hunting cabin door reinforced with new locks that made no sense. The tire iron from her truck bed used like a crowbar. The root cellar beneath the floor. Two small boys huddled together, lips blue, barely breathing. The walk back. 3 miles, through a blizzard that had turned the world into a white void. Carrying 40 pounds of children in her arms when she weighed barely 105 herself. Following the road by feel, by the slight depression under the snow, by the spacing of trees she'd memorized from years of hiking these mountains with her father. She shouldn't have made it. She knew that. The statistics were clear. At those temperatures with that wind chill, she should have frozen within an hour. But she'd kept walking anyway because stopping meant dying, and dying meant those boys would die too, alone in the dark. I need to see them, Elspeth said, trying to sit up. The doctor gently pushed her back down. You need rest. You have frostbite on 8 fingers and your right foot. Mild hypothermia, exhaustion bordering on complete systemic collapse. You'll see the boys when you can stand without passing out. The door opened. The air pressure in the room changed, became heavier, charged with something Elspeth couldn't name. Like standing too close to a bonfire, feeling the heat roll off in waves even before you saw the flames. The man from the hall entered, the one who'd fallen to his knees, the father. Without the snow and chaos, he was even more imposing. Over 6.5 feet tall with shoulders that filled the doorway. He wore a fresh black shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and covered in scars. But it was his eyes that pinned her to the bed, amber piercing, intensely intelligent. The eyes of a predator that missed nothing. Leave us, Tavish, the man said. His voice was deep, resonant, the kind of voice that expected obedience. She's weak alpha, the doctor warned. Don't push her. I said leave us. The doctor hesitated, then nodded and slipped out, closing the heavy door with a soft click that sounded final. The man pulled a chair close to the bed. The wood creaked under his weight as he sat down. He studied her for a long, uncomfortable minute. Elspeth felt like a specimen under a microscope, every detail cataloged and analyzed. She pulled the sheet up to her chin, suddenly conscious of her poverty in a way she hadn't been since childhood. Her rough hands calloused from scrubbing floors and hauling supplies. Her ragged cuticles. The cheap sports bra she'd been wearing for 3 years because she couldn't afford to replace it. Everything about her screamed poor, struggling, barely surviving. And this man radiated wealth and power like heat off asphalt in summer. What is your name? He asked. It wasn't angry, but it commanded an answer. Elspeth Crane. Everyone calls me Elsie. And who do you work for, Elspeth Crane? Elsie frowned. I work for Ridgeline Property Management. I clean rental cabins. Or I did. My truck broke down. I'm probably fired by now. The man's eyes narrowed slightly. You aren't a shifter. You aren't from a neighboring pack. You are fully human. Is that a crime? Elsie asked, a spark of defiance cutting through her fear. She'd spent too many years being looked down on for being poor, for being nobody to take it from a stranger, no matter how intimidating he was. Look, mister, I don't know who you are or what's going on. I was trying to get home before the storm got bad. My truck died near the ridge. I walked. I heard crying. I broke the door down. That's it. That's it, the man repeated, leaning forward. You broke down a reinforced oak door on a cabin that hasn't been used in 2 decades, found 2 children who had been missing for 52 hours, and carried them 3 miles through a blizzard that killed 2 of our best trackers 3 years ago. Just like that. Elsie blinked. I didn't know they were yours. I couldn't leave them. What kind of person leaves kids to freeze? The man went silent. He was doing something with his breathing, she realized. Slow, deliberate inhales through his nose. Reading her somehow, though she couldn't understand how. Why were you on Route 9? He asked finally. It's a closed road. Has been for 5 years since the bridge washed out. Shame burned Elsie's cheeks. I couldn't afford the toll on the highway. $5. I took the back road to save $5. The man's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Something that might have been understanding or pity or both. You risked your life to save $5. I risk my life every day just existing, Elsie said quietly. What's one more risk? He studied her for another long moment, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather wallet. He extracted several bills and placed them on the bedside table. Elsie's eyes widened. $500 bills. More money than she made in a month. For your truck, he said, and for your trouble. I can't take that, Elsie said, automatically reaching for the bills to hand them back. His hand covered hers, stopping the motion. His palm was warm, almost hot and rough with calluses that matched her own. The touch sent an electric jolt up her arm that made her breath catch. You can and you will, he said, but you can't leave yet. What? Why not? The boys were drugged, he said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming darker. We found traces of wolfsbane in their blood. Do you know what that is? A flower, Elsie guessed, like in the gardening books. The man watched her pulse point at her throat. She could feel it jumping, but apparently he saw something that satisfied him because he continued. Wolfsbane is lethal to shifters. A paralytic. Someone dosed my sons to keep them quiet. Someone hid them in that cabin in the middle of a storm expecting them to die of exposure. It was an execution carefully planned, and you ruined it. The weight of those words settled over Elsie like a lead blanket. Someone wanted them to die. Someone wanted them to suffer first. And now that person knows you found them, knows you can identify where they were kept. That makes you a witness, which makes you a target. Fear spiked through Elsie's chest, sharp and cold. I didn't see anyone. I don't know anything. Doesn't matter. Until I find out who did this, you are under the protection of the Iron Peak Pack, whether you like it or not. The roads are still blocked. The storm won't clear for another 2 days. You'll stay here where I can keep you safe. I can't just stay here, Elsie protested. I have bills, rent. My landlord will evict me if I'm not back by Monday. Your landlord will be paid, the man said with absolute finality. Your bills will be handled. You stay until the threat is neutralized. Before Elsie could argue further, the door banged open. A woman marched in, tall and elegant, in a way that made Elsie feel even smaller. She wore black slacks and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Elsie's truck. Her hair was perfect, her makeup flawless, her entire presence screaming money and breeding. 2 guards flanked her, looking uncomfortable. Why are you wasting time talking to her, Ashford? The woman demanded, her eyes flashing. She's clearly involved. She appears magically at the exact moment the storm peaks, just happens to find the boys, plays the hero to get inside our defenses. It's textbook infiltration. So his name was Ashford. Elsie filed that away. Vivian, Ashford said, his tone carrying a warning. Leave. She waits until the search teams are called off. Vivian continued, ignoring him, then swoops in to save the day. How convenient. How suspicious. She stalked over to the bed, looming over Elsie. Who paid you? Was it the Northern Pack? How much did they offer to stage this little hero act? I don't know what you're talking about, Elsie said, shrinking back against the pillows. I don't want anything. I just wanted to help. Liar. Vivian raised her hand and Elsie watched in horror as the woman's nails lengthened into claws sharp and curved and deadly. I'll make you talk. The growl that filled the room wasn't just a sound. It was a physical force, a vibration so deep it rattled the water glass on the bedside table. Ashford was on his feet in a blur of motion that shouldn't have been possible for someone his size. He caught Vivian's wrist inches from Elsie's face. His grip looked casual, but Vivian gasped in pain, trying to pull away and failing completely. Touch her, Ashford snarled, and his eyes were glowing now, fully golden, human, and terrifying. And you will lose this hand, Vivian. I will take it at the wrist, and I will not be gentle about it. Ashford, she's human, Vivian gasped. A nobody. You're choosing her over your own beta female. I am choosing justice, Ashford said, shoving Vivian back toward the door. And I am choosing the woman who did what you and your precious counsel could not. She saved my sons. If she was part of some conspiracy, she would have let them die and vanished into the storm. Now get out of my sight before I forget that council law protects you. Vivian rubbed her wrist, her face twisting into a mask of pure hatred as she looked at Elsie. This isn't over, she hissed. You don't belong here, human. This pack will eat you alive. She stormed out, the guards hesitating before following her. The room fell silent. Elsie was trembling violently, adrenaline flooding her system. She'd just watched a woman grow claws, watched a man's eyes turn gold. None of this was possible. None of this was real. Except it was. The evidence was right in front of her. Werewolves. They were real, and she'd somehow walked into the middle of their world. I apologize for Vivian, Ashford said, turning back to her. The gold had faded from his eyes, replaced by exhaustion. She is protective and paranoid. The attack on my sons has everyone on edge. She's insane, Elsie whispered. Ashford let out a short, dry chuckle. It was the first hint of humor she'd seen from him. That too. He sat down again, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. For the first time, he looked less like an intimidating authority figure and more like a man who hadn't slept in days. The boys are asking for you, he said quietly. They won't eat, won't let the nurses near them. They keep crying for the snow lady. Something warm bloomed in Elsie's chest. Can I see them? When Tavish clears you to walk. For now, rest, eat. He gestured to a tray that had appeared on the side table while she'd been unconscious. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, fresh bread, and an enormous slice of chocolate cake. Enough food for 3 people. Elsie's stomach growled audibly. I'll check on you in a few hours, Ashford said, standing. He paused at the door. Thank you, Elspeth Crane, for my sons, for walking through hell to bring them home. I owe you a debt I can never repay. Then he was gone, and Elsie was alone with more questions than answers, and a meal that smelled better than anything she'd eaten in months. She reached for the chicken. Tomorrow she could worry about werewolves and conspiracies and why a woman with claws wanted her dead. Tonight she was just going to eat until her stomach stopped hurting and sleep in a bed that didn't have springs poking through the mattress. Small victories, she'd learned to appreciate those. The screaming started at 2 in the morning. Elsie woke from a deep sleep to the sound of children shrieking in terror, high-pitched and desperate. She was out of bed before she was fully conscious, ignoring the protest of her frostbitten toes following the sound down the hallway. Guards shouted at her to stop. She ignored them. The pediatric wing was chaos. Nurses scrambling, machines beeping frantically. And in the center of it all, on a large hospital bed, Gray and Storm were huddled in the corner, pressing their backs against the wall. Their eyes were wide pupils dilated to black pools. They were snarling tiny high-pitched growls that were more fear than aggression. Their small hands were curled into claws, actual claws, and they were swiping at anyone who came close. Dr. Tavish approached them with a syringe. Boys, please. It's just medicine to help you sleep. No, Gray screamed, and his claws slashed out, catching the doctor's arm. Blood welled up bright red against white skin. Get away, Storm shrieked. Smelly man, monster, get away. It's Daddy. Ashford's voice boomed from the doorway. He strode into the light, hands up, trying to look non-threatening despite being a 6.5-foot wall of muscle. Boys, it's me, it's Dad, you're safe now. But the twins looked at him with no recognition in their eyes, only blind animal terror. The drugs were still messing with their senses, making them hallucinate threats where there were none. Daddy will hurt us too, Storm sobbed, covering his ears. Cold. It's too cold. Make it stop. Ashford froze, his face crumbling. Elsie could see it hit him like a physical blow. His sons were terrified of him. The man who would die for them, kill for them, burn the world down for them, and they saw him as another monster. Sedate them, Vivian said from the doorway. She'd materialized like a bad smell. They're hysterical. Knock them out before they hurt themselves or someone else. No more drugs, Ashford growled. Their systems are already overloaded. Well, then restrain them, Vivian insisted. Use the padded restraints. It's for their own safety. The chaos grew. The boys screamed louder, feeding off the tension in the room. More guards arrived, more nurses, all of them making it worse, their presence overwhelming the traumatized children. Elsie didn't ask permission, didn't announce herself, just walked past all of them, past the guards and nurses and the Alpha King himself, and sat on the edge of the hospital bed, not reaching for the boys, not trying to grab them, just sitting there, slumped and quiet, letting out a long, exaggerated sigh. I'm so cold, Elsie said softly to no one in particular. I wish I had someone to help me warm up. My hands are freezing. The screaming stopped, just stopped like someone had hit a mute button. Gray and Storm's heads snapped toward her in unison. Their eyes still dilated and wild locked onto her face. Storm blinked. Snow Lady, hi Storm, Elsie said, smiling though her eyes were filled with tears. My hands are so cold. See, she held out her palms showing the bandages on her frostbitten fingers. Gray crawled forward, slowly sniffing the air. Wolves did that, she realized. Use scent to identify people. He recognized her smell, rain and cheap vanilla lotion and antiseptic. He reached out one small hand and placed it in hers. His palm was warm, almost hot. Werewolf metabolism. I got you, Gray whispered, his voice trembling. I'll help you warm up. Me too, Storm said, scrambling after his brother. Within seconds, both boys were clinging to Elsie. Storm buried his face in her neck, inhaling deeply like her scent was the only thing keeping him anchored to reality. Gray curled into her lap, wrapping his arms around her waist, like she might disappear if he let go. Elsie began to hum. She didn't know any lullabies, had never learned them. So she just hummed whatever melody came to mind, probably making it up as she went. But to the wolves in the room, it sounded like the most beautiful thing they'd ever heard. She rocked the boys back and forth, rubbing slow circles on their backs, the way her mother had done for her years ago when nightmares woke her in the dark. Ashford stood frozen watching. Something shifted in his expression, wonder mixing with pain. His own wolf Elsie realized somehow was responding to this. The predator inside him, usually restless and aggressive, had gone quiet, calm, content. She keeps the pack safe. Elsie heard him whisper so quietly she almost missed it. She is the hearth. Vivian made a noise of disgust. This is ridiculous. She's confusing them. They think she's their mother or something equally absurd. Someone remove her before she does more damage. She stepped forward, reaching for Elsie's arm. Don't. Ashford's voice was flat final. One word that held the weight of absolute authority. Ashford, look at them. They're clinging to a servant like they're clinging to their savior. There, Ashford corrected. His eyes met Elsie's across the room. Something passed between them, some understanding that didn't need words. Storm, the man who gave you candy in the garden. What did he smell like? Storm didn't look up from Elsie's shoulder. His voice was muffled against her neck, like the basement, like clean stuff and cigarettes. Ashford's eyes met Declan's across the room. Bleach and tobacco. Declan's face went hard. Marlowe, the groundskeeper. Find him, Ashford said, his voice devoid of emotion. Bring him to the interrogation room. Alive. Declan nodded and disappeared. Ashford turned back to the bed. The boys had fallen asleep, their breathing evening out, their small bodies finally relaxed. Elsie was falling asleep too, her head resting awkwardly on the metal bed rail, but her hand was still protective over Gray's back. Ashford walked over quietly. He gently lifted Elsie's head and slid a pillow under it. She murmured something incoherent but didn't wake. Her skin was warm now. The dangerous pallor had faded, replaced by healthy pink. She looked young, he realized. Couldn't be more than 24 or 25. Just a kid herself, really. A kid who'd done something impossibly brave. He felt a pull toward her, something biological and terrifying. His wolf wanted to curl up on that bed next to her, wanted to protect her the way she'd protected his sons, wanted to keep her close and safe, and no. Ashford shut that thought down hard. A human could not be a mate to an alpha. It was biologically impossible. They were too fragile to survive the mating bond, too weak to bear werewolf children. The intensity of the connection would kill them. It was forbidden by council law for exactly that reason. Too many humans had died in the old days before the laws were written. Good people who fell in love with wolves and paid for it with their lives. But as Ashford looked at the tableau of the human woman and his wolf son sleeping peacefully for the first time in days, he realized the council's laws might not matter anymore. Because for the first time since Serafina died, his house felt like a home. Watch her, Ashford ordered the guards posted outside the door. His voice was quiet but iron hard. If anyone, and I mean anyone including Vivian, tries to enter this room while she sleeps, you stop them. Lethal force is authorized if necessary. The guards' eyes widened, but they nodded. Yes, Alpha. Ashford cast one more look at the sleeping woman, memorizing the scene. Then he turned and walked out. He had a traitor to hunt, and he had a mystery to solve. Why did a human woman calm his wolves better than their own kind, and why did he suddenly feel like he would burn the entire world down if anyone touched a single hair on her head? The dungeon beneath Iron Peak Lodge was not designed for torture. The pack had rules about that, laws written centuries ago when werewolves were still learning to be civilized. But it was designed to break the mind in ways that were somehow worse than physical pain. The walls were lined with soundproof lead and concrete, cutting the prisoner off from the one thing a wolf needed most. The pack bond. That invisible thread that connected every member to each other, that constant awareness of belonging, of being part of something larger than yourself. To be down here was to be utterly alone in the universe. Marlowe sat on a metal stool in the center of the interrogation room. He was 62 years old, his hair thinning to wisps of gray, his hands trembling like leaves in a storm. The smell coming off him was overwhelming. Bleach and tobacco, yes, but underneath that, the sour, rotting stench of guilt, so thick it made the air taste poisonous. Ashford stood in the shadows watching. He hadn't touched the man yet. Didn't need to. His mere presence, the suffocating weight of his alpha aura filling the small space, was making Marlowe hyperventilate. I didn't mean for them to die. The words tumbled out of Marlowe like he'd been holding them in for days, the confession desperate and broken. She said it was just a scare. Leverage. She said they'd be picked up within an hour. The storm hit faster than the forecast predicted, and I tried to call her. Tried to tell her the boys were still out there. She wouldn't answer. She just wouldn't. Ashford repeated, stepping into the light. Who is she? Marlowe shook his head violently, tears streaming down his weathered face. I don't know. I never saw her face. She wore a cloak with the hood up. We met at the roadside diner on Route 4. She paid in cash. Old bills untraceable. $10,000 in a brown envelope. Ashford moved so fast he was a blur. His hand slammed against the concrete wall next to Marlowe's head, and the impact cracked the surface, spiderweb fractures spreading outward. Dust rained down. You sold my sons for $10,000, Ashford said, his voice dangerously quiet, each word carved from ice. I have debts, Marlowe whimpered. Gambling, Vegas, bad bets that kept getting worse. They were going to kill my wife. Cut off her fingers and mail them to me one at a time. I didn't have a choice. I didn't. You always have a choice, Ashford snarled, and the sound that came from him wasn't entirely human. You chose money over the lives of children. You chose your own skin over the future of this pack. You are rogue now, Marlowe, stripped of name and bond. You have nothing. The wail that came from Marlowe echoed in the small room high in Keening. To be declared rogue was a fate worse than death for a wolf. It meant exile from packlands. It meant the slow descent into madness that came from being cut off from the bond, wandering the wilderness until some hunter put you down like the rabid animal you'd become. But the scent, Ashford pressed, leaning close. You have a nose. You're a wolf. Even if you didn't see her face, you smelled her. What was it? Marlowe sniffed, trying to remember through the terror. Chemical, like she was covering something up. Expensive perfume. Underneath that, something sharp. Crushed lilies and copper. Ashford straightened. Lilies. Vivian wore a custom perfume imported from France. White lilies and amber, distinctive enough that you could identify her from across a crowded room. It wasn't proof. Anyone could buy lily perfume. A smart enemy would use it specifically to frame Vivian. But the copper, that metallic tang that was the smell of old blood, of violence planned and executed. Lock him in the deep cell, Ashford ordered Declan, who had been standing silently by the door. If he speaks to anyone at all, you execute him. No trial, no ceremony, just end it. Declan nodded grimly. Yes, Alpha. Ashford strode out of the dungeon, his mind racing. Vivian had motive. She'd made no secret of her ambition, her belief that she should be Luna. She'd been furious when Ashford chose Serafina, a woman Vivian considered beneath them both. Common bloodline. No political power. Just kindness and strength and a laugh that could light up a room. And when Serafina died, Vivian had been the first to suggest that Ashford needed a new mate. Someone suitable. Someone who understood pack politics and strategic alliances. Meaning her. When Ashford had refused every advance, every carefully orchestrated encounter, had Vivian decided to eliminate the obstacle between her and the throne the heirs. If Grey and Storm were dead, the council would pressure Ashford to remarry quickly to produce new heirs before the feral curse took him, and Vivian would position herself as the obvious choice. But then Elsie had ruined everything. Ashford took the stairs 3 at a time, heading for the medical wing. He needed to see them, needed to confirm with his own eyes that his sons were safe, that the woman who'd saved them was still breathing. The guards outside the pediatric room straightened when they saw him. Alpha, she's still asleep, the boys too. No disturbances. Ashford nodded and pushed the door open quietly. The scene inside made something in his chest clench tight. Elsie was curled on the hospital bed, Grey tucked against her front and Storm against her back. Both boys holding on to her like she was the only solid thing in a world that had tried to kill them. She had one arm around each of them, even in sleep, protective and gentle. Dr. Tavish sat in the corner monitoring vitals on a tablet. He looked up when Ashford entered, then gestured for him to step back into the hallway. The boys are recovering well, Tavish said quietly once the door was closed. Core temperature normal. The wolfsbane is metabolizing out of their systems. They should be fully recovered in another 48 hours. And Elsie, also recovering. The frostbite on her fingers will heal without permanent damage. Her foot is more concerning. She may lose 2 toes, but we won't know for another day or 2. Tavish paused. Ashford, we need to talk about her. I know she's human. I know the council will have opinions about her staying here. It's not that. Tavish pulled a file from under his arm, held it like it contained classified secrets, which Ashford realized it probably did. I ran a standard blood panel to check for infections from the exposure, make sure nothing was compromised. Look at her hormone markers. Ashford took the file, flipped it open. He saw charts and numbers that meant nothing to him. Speak plainly, Tavish. She's human, biologically completely human. No wolf DNA, no shifter ancestry going back at least 5 generations based on genetic markers. But her pheromones, Ashford, they're mimicking the chemical signature of an omega wolf. Ashford went very still. That's impossible. I know, but look at the data. Her body is producing the exact combination of hormones that omegas produce. The scent that calms aggressive alphas, the pheromones that soothe traumatized pups, the chemical signals that promote pack bonding and reduce conflict. Tavish's voice was shaking with scientific excitement. It's an evolutionary anomaly. Maybe a recessive gene from thousands of years ago when humans and wolves were closer. Or maybe just a biological miracle. But this is why the boys calm for her, why your wolf responded to her presence. Biologically, she reads to our senses as the ultimate nurturer. Ashford stared at the papers, the implications crashing over him like an avalanche. If this was true, if Elsie was somehow producing omega pheromones naturally, then she wasn't just rare. She was the most valuable creature in the supernatural world. If the council found out, they would want to study her. Lock her in a laboratory and run tests until they understood how her biology worked. They would see her as a resource, not a person. If the rogue packs found out, they would try to steal her. Breed her like livestock, trying to create more omegas to control their soldiers, to build armies of calm, obedient wolves who never question orders. She would never be free again, never be safe. She would spend the rest of her life running or imprisoned, and either way she would lose the quiet dignity he'd seen in her eyes. That spark of defiance when she'd asked if being human was a crime. "Burn this file," Ashford said, his eyes glowing gold. "Now, Alpha, this is a significant discovery. If we could understand the mechanism, we might be able to—" "Burn it," Ashford snarled. "Delete the digital records. Scrub the lab computers. No one knows about this. As far as anyone is concerned, she is a human woman with a kind personality and nothing more. Do you understand me, Tavish?" The doctor stared at him for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "I understand, Alpha." "Good. Now get out of my sight before I regret trusting you with this." Tavish bowed and left quickly, clutching the file to his chest. Ashford turned to the window that looked into the pediatric room. He could see Elsie from here, still asleep, one hand curled protectively over Storm's dark hair. She was an Omega, a human Omega, and she was living in the middle of the most dangerous political situation the Northern Rockies had seen in decades. He would protect her, whatever it took, whoever he had to destroy. She had given him back his sons, his future, his reason to keep fighting the curse for another day. He would give her safety in return, even if it meant going to war with his own council. 10 days passed in a strange rhythm of recovery and routine. The blizzard finally cleared on day 4, leaving the valley buried under 8 feet of snow that would take weeks to melt. The roads remained impassable, which meant Elsie was trapped at Iron Peak, whether she wanted to be or not. Not that she seemed to mind. She spent her days with Gray and Storm, who refused to let her out of their sight for more than a few minutes. They ate breakfast together, pancakes that Gray insisted on drowning in syrup, while Storm drew wolves on his napkin with crayons. They built elaborate structures out of blocks in the playroom, castles and fortresses, and one memorable attempt at a bridge that collapsed spectacularly. Elsie taught Storm to paint with watercolors and discovered the boy had genuine talent. His wolves weren't childish scribbles, but careful studies of movement and form, the kind of artistic eye that couldn't be taught. She read to them every night stories from the pack library, fairy tales and adventure stories, and one memorable evening where Gray demanded she read a technical manual about truck engines cover to cover. By day 7, both boys were sleeping through the night without nightmares. Their laughter had returned bright and clear, filling the halls of the lodge with a sound that had been absent for far too long. Ashford watched from a distance. He told himself he was just being cautious, maintaining appropriate boundaries. But the truth was, he couldn't stay away. He found excuses to walk past the playroom, to check on them during lunch, to stand in the hallway outside their bedroom and listen to Elsie's voice reading about dragons and heroes. His wolf was obsessed with her, wanted to be near her constantly, wanted to curl up next to her and sleep safe and warm and content in a way he hadn't felt since Serafina died. It was dangerous, terrifying, and completely undeniable. On day 9, Elsie joined him for dinner. The boys had insisted, and Ashford hadn't had the heart to refuse them. Gray made her sit next to Ashford at the long table, chattering about the Lego tower he'd built that afternoon. "It was 12 feet tall," Gray announced proudly. "Taller than Daddy." "Very impressive," Elsie said, smiling. Her whole face changed when she smiled, Ashford noticed. The wariness fell away, replaced by genuine warmth. "Did you build things when you were little?" Storm asked shyly. "My dad taught me to build trail cairns," Elsie said. "Little stacks of rocks to mark paths in the mountains. We'd hike for miles, just the two of us, and leave markers so other hikers wouldn't get lost." "Your father was a hiker?" Ashford asked, genuinely curious. Elsie's smile faded slightly. "Park ranger. He loved the mountains, knew every trail in the Bitterroot by heart. He taught me to read weather patterns, track animals, navigate by the stars. He died when I was 12. Avalanche rescue. He went in to save some college kids who'd gone skiing out of bounds, got them out alive. But the second wave took him. The table went quiet. Ashford saw the pain in her eyes, old and deep, but worn smooth by time. The kind of grief you learn to live with because you had no other choice. "I'm sorry," Ashford said and reached across the table to squeeze her hand. Just once, brief and gentle. The touch sent electricity up his arm, made his wolf rumble with satisfaction. Elsie felt it too, he could tell. Her breath hitched, her pupils dilating just slightly. She pulled her hand back, looked down at her plate. It was a long time ago. He died doing what he believed in, helping people. I try to honor that. You do, Ashford said quietly. You walked into a blizzard for 2 children you'd never met. That's exactly the kind of thing he would have done. Elsie looked up at him and something passed between them. Understanding, recognition. The knowledge that they'd both lost people they loved, and that loss had shaped them into who they were now. The moment stretched fragile and precious. Then Gray knocked over his milk, and Storm started laughing, and the spell broke. But Ashford felt it settle in his chest. Warm and certain, and absolutely terrifying. He was falling for her, this human woman with her gray eyes and her fierce protectiveness, and her terrible jokes that made the boys giggle. This Omega who didn't know what she was, who had no idea the power she held. And if the council found out, they would tear her away from him. On day 12, the council made its move. Ashford was in his office reviewing security footage with Declan when the message came. Official summons, emergency session called by Councilwoman Vivian Ashcroft, seconded by Councilor Aldrich Stone. Purpose of session, Ashford read aloud, investigation into the presence of a human on Pac lands, and assessment of security breaches related to the abduction of the Alpha heirs. It's a trap, Declan said immediately. Vivian's setting you up. She'll use this to attack Elsie, undermine your authority, and position herself as the voice of reason. I know, Ashford set the paper down, but I can't refuse. Council law says I have to attend emergency sessions or forfeit my vote. You're going to let them put Elsie on trial. I'm going to let them try, Ashford said, his voice hard, and then I'm going to dismantle every argument they make, publicly, in front of the entire pack. Vivian wants a political battle, I'll give her one. The session was scheduled for the next afternoon in the Great Hall, open to all PAC members who wished to attend. It was PAC law, transparency, democracy, the things that kept them from becoming the monsters humans feared. Ashford went to find Elsie. She was in the library with the boys, reading them a story about a girl who befriended a dragon. Storm was curled in her lap. Gray leaned against her shoulder. She looked up when Ashford entered, and the smile that lit her face made his heart stutter. The council has called a hearing, Ashford said without preamble. About you, about the circumstances of how you came to be here. It's scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. The smile faded. They're going to make me leave. They're going to try, Ashford corrected. I won't let them, but I need you to be prepared. They'll ask you questions about your father, your background, how you found the boys. Some of the questions will be hostile, designed to make you look suspicious. Elsie set the book aside, carefully extracting herself from the tangle of boys. What should I say? The truth, just the truth. You have nothing to hide. And Elsie, he waited until she met his eyes. I'll be there. I won't let them hurt you. She searched his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, I trust you. Those 3 words hit Ashford harder than any blow he'd ever taken in battle. She trusted him. This woman who'd been betrayed by life itself, who'd learned to survive on her own, who had every reason to trust no one. She trusted him. He would not let her down. The next afternoon, 400 wolves packed into the Great Hall. Every bench filled, people standing against the walls, the air thick with anticipation and tension. Elsie stood in the center of the room alone, wearing the same jeans and borrowed sweater she'd been given when her own clothes had to be thrown away. She looked small, fragile, painfully human, surrounded by predators. But she stood straight, chin up, eyes forward, refusing to be cowed. Ashford sat at the council table with the 5 other members. Vivian sat perfectly composed, her fingers drumming once against the table. Aldrich looked smug, the others neutral, waiting to see which way the political winds would blow. Elder Helena Stone, the oldest member of the council at 73, called the session to order. This emergency hearing is convened to address the following concerns. First, the presence of a human on Pac lands without prior council approval. Second, questions regarding the circumstances of Elspeth Crane's discovery of the Alpha heirs. Third, assessment of security protocols and how they failed. Councilwoman Ashcroft, you called this session. Present your case. Vivian stood, and Ashford could smell the satisfaction rolling off her. She'd been planning this for days. Thank you, Elder Stone. I'll be direct. This woman appears out of nowhere in the middle of the worst blizzard in 50 years, claiming to have found the heirs in a location that dozens of our best trackers missed. The timing is suspicious. The circumstances are impossible. And yet, we're simply accepting her story without question. Vivian turned to face the assembled pack. I've done some research into Miss Crane's background. Her father, Patrick Sullivan, was known in human circles as an expert hunter. He spent 30 years in these mountains claiming to track elk and deer. But how many of us have been shot at by hunters? How many of our kind have fallen to silver bullets, fired by men who knew exactly what they were hunting? A murmur ran through the crowd. Elsie's face had gone pale, but she didn't look away. Her father taught her to track, Vivian continued, taught her to navigate terrain, taught her to read weather. Those are the skills of a hunter. And now she's inside our defenses, living in our lodge, gaining the trust of our future alphas. Ask yourselves, is that coincidence or infiltration? The crowd was listening now, doubt creeping in. Ashford felt rage building in his chest, but he forced himself to stay seated, to let this play out. Vivian was digging her own grave, she just didn't know it yet. I move, Vivian said, her voice ringing with false authority, that Elspeth Crane be removed from Packlands immediately and banned from future contact with the heirs, for their safety and ours. Silence fell. Ashford could see the pack watching him, waiting for his response. This was the moment, the test of his authority, his judgment, his strength as a leader. He stood slowly. Is that all, Vivian? Because I have questions of my own. Ashford walked to the center of the hall, positioning himself between Elsie and the council table. His presence commanded the space and the room fell into absolute silence. You speak of Patrick Sullivan as a hunter. Ashford began, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. I'll speak of him as a hero. Elder Helena, would you care to share the story of March 2009? Helena Stone looked up sharply, then slowly rose to her feet. At 73, she moved with the deliberate grace of someone who'd earned every year. My grandson Thomas went ice climbing in the Pintlers against my explicit orders. He was 17. Stupid. The anchor failed. Patrick Sullivan rappelled down a 100-foot cliff in a blizzard to reach him. Stayed with him for 6 hours until search and rescue arrived. Never asked for payment. Never wanted recognition. She turned to look at Elsie, and her expression softened. That man saved my family, and his daughter just saved yours, Alpha. I knew Patrick Sullivan. He had honor, and I see that same honor standing in this room right now. A ripple of murmurs ran through the crowd. Ashford pressed his advantage. Vivian claims the timing is suspicious. Let's examine that. Elsie's truck broke down on Route 9. We have the tow truck driver's statement confirming he found the vehicle abandoned at 11:47 p.m. on the night of the blizzard. The cabin where my sons were found is 3.2 miles from that location. Elsie walked that distance, broke down a reinforced door, and carried 2 children, weighing a combined 78 pounds, back through temperatures that reached 40 below with wind chill. Ashford turned to face Vivian directly. You want to talk about impossible? Here's what's impossible. Elsie has frostbite on 8 fingers, severe enough that she may lose 2 toes on her right foot. She wrapped her own scarf around Storm's neck, leaving her throat exposed to wind that could kill in minutes. If this was a con, if this was infiltration, she paid for it with pieces of her body. What kind of con artist does that? Vivian's jaw tightened. Dedication to a role. Deep cover operatives have done worse for what? Ashford cut her off. What's the end game in your conspiracy theory, Vivian? She saves my son so she can, live in a guest room and play with children, steal pack secrets. We've monitored her every movement for 12 days. She hasn't asked a single question about pack business, hasn't tried to access restricted areas, hasn't contacted anyone outside these walls. All she's done is care for 2 traumatized boys who wouldn't let anyone else near them. He gestured to the assembled pack. You all saw what happened in the medical wing. My sons were feral with terror, attacking trained medical staff, afraid of their own father. And a human woman with no shifter blood, no pack training, no connection to our world walked in and calmed them with a song. Exactly my point. Vivian stood, her voice rising. That's not normal. Humans don't have that effect on wolf pups. It's unnatural. She's done something to them, some kind of... She loved them, Ashford said quietly, and the simplicity of the statement cut through Vivian's hysteria like a knife. That's the great mystery you can't solve, Vivian. She walked into a storm and risked everything for 2 children she'd never met because it was the right thing to do. Not for money, not for power, not for political gain. Just because they needed help and she was the only one there to give it. The hall was silent. Ashford could see pack members nodding, the doubt in their eyes fading. I move to close this inquiry, Helena said, her voice carrying the weight of her years on the council. Elspeth Crane has been investigated. The evidence shows no conspiracy, no infiltration, no threat. What it shows is courage and compassion. Two qualities this pack should honor, not interrogate. All in favor. I, Helena said. Counselor Marcus Ironwood, the war veteran who'd been neutral throughout, raised his hand. I, Counselor Petra Silvermain, a grandmother of 40 years who ran the pack's school system, nodded firmly. I. Ashford raised his hand. I. Vivian remained seated, her face a mask of barely controlled rage. Aldrich Stone beside her looked like he'd swallowed something sour, but he didn't vote. Motion passes 4-0 with 2 abstentions, Helena declared. Elspeth Crane is cleared of all suspicion. This hearing is closed. The pack erupted into applause. Not universal, but enough. Enough to show that Elsie had won more than just the council's approval. She'd won their respect. Elsie stood in the center of it all, looking shell-shocked. Her hands were shaking. Ashford walked over to her, and the crowd quieted. Elspeth Crane, Ashford said, his voice formal but warm. On behalf of the Iron Peak Pack, and in my capacity as Alpha King, I offer you a position. Caretaker to my sons. Compensation of $12,000 per month. Private accommodations. Full access to pack resources and my personal protection. Do you accept? Elsie stared at him. Her mouth opened. Closed, opened again. 12,000 per month, Ashford confirmed. You'll earn every penny, trust me. Gray once locked his babysitter in the basement for 3 hours because she wouldn't let him have ice cream for breakfast. A ripple of laughter ran through the crowd. Elsie's lips twitched despite herself. I accept, she said quietly. Then louder, I accept. The applause was genuine this time, washing over the hall like a wave. Ashford extended his hand. Elsie shook it, and that electric current ran through him again. Their eyes met, held for a moment too long to be purely professional. Then Ashford released her hand and turned to the crowd. This session is adjourned. Go home. Spend time with your families. Remember what we almost lost and be grateful for what we have. The pack began to file out. Elsie stood there, still looking dazed. Vivian swept past without a word, but as she passed Elsie, she leaned in just close enough to whisper, "This isn't over. You're a liability, and liabilities get removed." Then she was gone, leaving only a trace of lilies and bitterness. Elsie turned to Ashford, her face pale. She just threatened me. I know, Ashford said. She does that. And I meant what I said about protection. You're under my authority now. Anyone who touches you answers to me. Is that supposed to make me feel better? Honestly, yes. Despite everything, Elsie laughed. It was a short, slightly hysterical sound, but it was genuine. I just got a job offer for more money than I've made in my entire life, and I'm being threatened by a woman who can grow claws. This is the weirdest day of my existence. Wait until you see what Gray does to the bathroom when he's angry, Ashford said. This will seem normal by comparison. Elsie looked up at him, and something in her expression softened. Thank you for defending me. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, Ashford said simply. You saved my sons. I would fight the entire council for you if I had to. The weight of those words hung in the air between them. Elsie's breath caught, and Ashford realized how close they were standing. Close enough to see the flecks of darker gray in her eyes. Close enough to smell her scent rain and vanilla cutting through all the pack smells that usually dominated his senses. Daddy! Gray's voice shattered the moment. The boy came running into the hall, Storm on his heels, both of them having escaped whatever babysitter was supposed to be watching them. Is Elsie staying? She's staying, right? She's staying, Ashford confirmed. Gray crashed into Elsie's legs, hugging her with the full-body enthusiasm only a 5-year-old could manage. Storm was more reserved, but he took her hand, squeezing tight. Good, Gray announced, because we need her. Come on, boys, Elsie said gently. Let's go to read before bed. She herded them toward the door, and Ashford watched them go. His sons, happy, laughing, safe, because of her. Declan appeared at his elbow. You know Vivian's going to escalate, right? She just lost a major political battle in front of the entire pack. Let her try, Ashford said, his voice hard. I've got Marlowe locked up. We have evidence pointing to her. If she makes a move, we'll be ready. And if she goes after Elsie, Ashford's eyes flashed gold. Then she'll learn exactly why I'm called the Alpha King. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Elsie moved into her suite, mornings with the Mars, afternoons exploring the lodge, evenings reading stories. She met pack members who thanked her, warriors who nodded with respect, mothers who asked her advice about their children. And through it all, Ashford watched. On day 18, Elsie found him in the war room late at night staring at maps. You should rest, she said from the doorway. Ashford looked up, surprised. I could say the same to you. Couldn't sleep. Too quiet. She stepped closer, looking at the maps. What are you looking for? Weak points. Vivian's been too quiet. When she's quiet, she's planning. Elsie studied the maps. If I wanted to attack this place, I'd come from here. She pointed to a northeast ridge. High ground. Cover. 3 approach routes. Ashford stared at her. How did you... My dad taught me. He said the mountains were a language. She traced another route. This valley looks like cover, but it's a flood zone. Suicide for anyone who doesn't know. You're right, Ashford said quietly, about all of it. They stood shoulder to shoulder studying maps in silence. Elsie was acutely aware of how close he was, of the heat radiating off him, of her heart beating too fast. Elsie, Ashford said, his voice low, I need to tell you something. Before he could continue, a howl split the night, long, mournful, full of pain. It came from deep in the lodge, from the secure cells. Ashford's head snapped up. His eyes widened. No, it's too early. The moon isn't full for 3 more days. Another howl, closer. The sound was wrong. Not human, not wolf, something broken. Stay here, Ashford commanded, already moving. What's happening? The curse, it's getting worse. He was out the door running. Elsie should have stayed. But she thought about those howls, about the pain in them, and she couldn't. She followed. The secure cells were 3 levels down, the corridor dimly lit. At the end, behind bars thick as her wrists, she could see movement. Ashford was in there, and he wasn't human anymore, not fully wolf either. Stuck somewhere in between, bones twisted in ways that looked agonizing. Skin rippling with fur that appeared and disappeared, eyes glowing gold with no consciousness in them. Just animal pain and rage. He was chained to the wall with silver, and the metal was burning his skin, sizzling, the smell of scorched flesh filling the air. Ashford, Elsie whispered, his head snapped toward her. The snarl was pure predator. He lunged. The chains snapped taut, holding him back by inches. His claws scraped stone, leaving deep gouges. Elsie should have run. Instead, she walked closer. Elsie, no! Declan's voice panicked. Get back. He'll kill you. But Elsie wasn't listening. She stopped at the bars, close enough to feel the heat radiating off Ashford's twisted form, close enough that one swipe would end her. Ashford, she said softly, just his name. He snarled again, saliva dripping from teeth too long, too sharp. Elsie took a breath, and then, without knowing why, she began to hum, the same melody she'd used with Grain and Storm. Ashford went still. The snarling stopped, his head tilted, listening. Elsie hummed louder. She wrapped her fingers around one of the bars. I'm here. You're not alone. Come back. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Ashford's form began to shift, bones realigning, fur receding, the glow dimming to warm amber. He collapsed to his knees, gasping, still chained, but human, fully human. Elsie, he rasped, you shouldn't, you can't. But I did, Elsie said simply. Declan stared in shock. That's impossible. Nothing stops the curse. She's not just any Omega doctor, Tavish said, appearing in the corridor. Ashford looked up at Elsie through the bars. What are you? I don't know, Elsie said honestly, but I know this. You're not alone. Whatever this curse is, we'll figure it out. Together. The word hung in the air. Together. Ashford reached through the bars. Elsie took his hand without hesitation. Their fingers intertwined, and that electric current was stronger, like something clicking into place. The cycles are accelerating, Declan said quietly. If the curse is this strong now, in 3 days, when the full moon hits... He didn't finish. Ashford looked at Elsie, still holding her hand. I have 5 years before the curse takes me completely. That's what the witch promised. Every alpha king in my line goes feral by 40. I'm 34, unless what? Unless I bond with an Omega. But there are no Omegas left. The bloodline died out. He squeezed her hand. Then you walk through my door, and my wolf calmed for the first time in years. He didn't tell her the full truth, not yet, not until he could guarantee her safety. Stay with me, Ashford said, just for tonight, until the worst passes. Please. I'm not going anywhere, Elsie promised. She sat on the cold stone floor outside the cell, hand holding his through the bars. And there they stayed as night wore on and the curse slowly released its grip. 2 broken people finding hope. Outside, Vivian stood at her window watching the moon. She'd seen Elsie run after Ashford, watch through security cameras as the human did the impossible. Stop the curse. With a song. Vivian, his hand clenched into a fist, nails cutting her palm. An Omega. It had to be. She pulled out her phone, dialed. It's me, she said. Move up the timeline. The Feast of First Moon. 3 weeks, that's when we strike. A pause. Yes, the human needs to die. Make it look like an accident. We end this. She hung up watching the mountains. Soon, she thought. Soon.